Season 3 is here, and Warzone's weapon tuning was adjusted a bit with the most recent patch. So what's good, what should you be using, and what weapons were maybe knocked out of the meta to make way for new weapons? Today we're tackling all that here in this, so as we go along, drop your thoughts down below. What do you think of the weapon selection for Season 3? Like it, dislike it, whatever the case, feel free to drop your thoughts, and if you enjoy the video, do me a favor and drop a like on it. As well, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay updated with all things Modern Warfare 2, Warzone 2, and anything COD related. And finally, check out my friends over at G Fuel, where code Espresso can get you 30% off certain items for the month of April, like tubs of Starfruit and Hype Sauce, two of my personal favorites, linked below if interested, but more on them in a bit. For now, let's jump into the loadouts that you should be using. Now first, before we get into the no-nonsense of what you should be using with weapon builds, what changed exactly? For the sake of some of our weapon pool, one of the big things was the explosive ammunition changes, where the weapons of the Victus XMR, MCPR 300, and the FJX Imperium all can one-shot players to the head now. So the one-shot meta is kind of back. But beyond that, notable weapons for changes include, on paper, the nerf of the ISO Hemlock, spoiler alert, it's still really good, the buffs to the STB 556 in all areas except for the mid-range damage, the decrease to the TAC 56 headshot multiplier, further decreases to the RPK, kicking it while it's down, and the headshot decreases to the Vel and Vaznev. So what changed? Preliminarily, we have a few weapons that are now in our top 10 that weren't before, but your strong contenders are still very strong contenders. So you'll see a lot of familiar builds here with this if you followed along since, well, kind of the launch of Warzone 2 in November in some cases, but this update didn't knock too many weapons out of contention, but instead made more weapons viable by bringing the outliers in closer to the pack of weapons. So a lot of the long range fights don't feel all that great with rifles anymore and such by comparison, but when you compare the ISO from Season 2 to Season 3 overall, just individually on that, it's a situational difference that will be noticed in only some scenarios. So that said, let's start with the ISO since we were just talking about that. Still a great choice for your arsenal. The ISO Hemlock, I'd recommend the Harbinger D20, the Fielder T50, the 45 round mag, the Phantom Grip, and the AMOP V4. Still, honestly, I think one of the best pick up and use weapons that you can end up using within Warzone 2 within the season, but that'd be the build that I would recommend. Next, the Vel 46 is still one of my preferreds within Warzone 2, especially for close quarters engagements, but even though the Vel ended up having some headshot decreases, it can still absolutely get the job done just because of that fire rate and the mobility it affords you. But for this, I'd recommend the VLK Laser 7mW, the Lockshot KT85, the X10 Drop Grip, the Schlager Soldier Grip, and the Demo RXT Stock. That's a build we've talked about before, but one that I still will stand by. Then, for other close quarter situations, the Vaznev 9K still, again, is pretty good. Yes, like the Vel, it did have a headshot decrease, but it was kind of minimal in that regard. You're not going to notice it too much, but it's still a great weapon that you can end up using in regards to close quarters engagements. For this, I'd recommend the FSS OLV Laser, the CAS 1 381mm, the 45 round magazine, the Markiv R7 stock, and the True Tac Grip along with that. Now, we've seen those weapons before, but one that is a bit newer here to the introduction that is, I'm still not entirely sure where I fall with this in regards to top 10 placements. As always, when we discuss these, there's not really anything in regards to definitive 1 to 10 listing. I think this is probably one that has made its way into the top 10, but it might not be a top 5 weapon per se just yet. Still ironing out my preferred build here at this, but that being the STB 556. Again, seeing on paper quite a few buffs to the weapon itself, but for this, I'd recommend the 24.4-inch Bruin S620 barrel, the Edge 47 grip, the 42 round magazine. Unfortunately, that's still the max you'll end up getting. You have the single tap mod, but that only takes it down to 10 rounds, the Bruin Q900 grip, and the AMOP V4 optic. Now, this felt good in medium to close range, but does not really hold up over distance too much. Also, again, 42 rounds at max becomes a semi-hindrance, so it's one that is definitely, I think, making its way into it here, but maybe at an 8, 9, or 10 position, but it's a new welcome face, I think, to the meta overall. Next, Espresso from the future here is going to drop something in while editing. I actually wanted to throw in an M4 class. I realized I didn't do this here looking back and editing it through, and it's honestly a weapon that is very good, and statistically speaking, the average TTKs put this above the ISO, TAC 56, and the STB now. So honestly, this one was kind of a sleeper, but looking back at it, it's pretty solid. For this, I'd recommend the AMOP V4, the High Tower 20-inch barrel, the Harbinger D20, the FTAC Ripper 56 underbarrel, and the 60 round magazine. Try this one out, it's flying under the radar a little bit. Beyond that, going back to some familiar faces, the TAC 56, still a great weapon here, even though we did see that headshot decrease. But for this, I'd recommend the 17.5-inch Tundra Pro barrel, the Echoless 80 muzzle, the 556 high velocity 50 ammunition, 60 round mag, and the FSS combat grip. The one that I've been playing around with a lot here since the update is one that is a phenomenal sniper support weapon, that being the Chimera, one that still can get the job done in close quarters, but also can challenge those mid-range engagements. Obviously, if you're taking a sniper, using it as sniper support, you're going to have those long ranges covered if you are accurate. So for this build, I'd recommend the 10-inch SA Phoenix barrel, the Lockshot KT85, the Edge 47 grip, the 45 round magazine, and an optic of your choice. If you want to play for a bit more long range, you can end up using something like the AMOP V4, but if you want to play for something a bit closer quarters, you can use that Cronin Mini Pro. Although I will say one thing that I have been playing around with a little bit is taking off that Lockshot KT85 muzzle and changing it out for that D37 grip for a little bit more recoil control. Your handling is barely touched by this, but it offers a little bit more control if you need to challenge something medium to longer range, but again, interchangeable in that regard. Definitely recommend the Chimera though. But next I want to talk about one that I think because of the Vel, because of the Vaznev nerfs here that we ended up getting, it's one that shines a bit brighter than it did before. It was definitely an option within Season 2, but I think it's now absolutely one of the main contenders for the SMG play, the PDSW 528. For this, I'd recommend the FTAC Series 9 14.5 inch, the Bruin Pendulum, the GR33 Light Rail, the Bruin Q900 grip, and the Cronin Mini Pro optic. Or if you don't want to use an optic slot, you can end up adjusting it accordingly to something that fits a little better for a build for you. But again, I think this got elevated a little bit by bringing some of those other weapons more in line with the mass of the weapons. Beyond that, though, I want to talk about the Sakin MG38. Still, again, another long-range contender here. The MG meta continues on a little bit in that regard. The RPK, again, for whatever reason, got kind of kicked while it was down. I mean, I'm all for keeping a weapon that was meta for 2-3 months at a time out of the meta, but it seemed a little bit unnecessary at that point. It's already not the best choice, but the Sakin really wasn't touched all that much. So for this, I'd recommend the ZLR Talon 5, the 20-inch Bruin Silver Series barrel, the Bruin Warrior LMG underbarrel, the Bruin Q900 grip wrap, and the AMOP V4. Same deal that we talked about here before, still recommend that. Then I'd recommend for the final primary here in regards to close quarters, medium range, and somewhat long range is the Kastov 74U. One that, again, is a rather decent sniper support if you guys want to play around with that. It can get the job done in close quarters. It can get it done at medium range. But for this, I'd recommend the FSS OLV laser, the BR209 barrel, the 45 round magazine, the Demo X2 grip, and the Markheave R7 stock. And finally, the last weapon, or rather weapons we'll talk about here for 10, is actually 3, because this is going to be some sniper builds. While we can kind of categorize snipers as one weapon because they are kind of all following one similar pattern, you need the explosive rounds for the one-shot meta. It is definitely something that will come down to preference here. So I want to rattle off a couple of builds that personally I'm still perfecting, still playing around with it, haven't really sniped since Warzone 2's launch, because it didn't give you the one-shot potential. But for this, I'd recommend the Victus XMR, MCPR 300, and FJX Imperium builds of, on the Victus, the VLK Laser 7mW, the Mac 8 33.5 Super, the Nilsound 90 silencer, the 50 cal explosive for that one-shot potential, and the Forge Tac Delta 4 optic. Though, if you want to throw on a stock or grip for ADS speed, if you're good with that base scope, you absolutely can. It's just something that sometimes that base scope, I'll take engagements where it's a little bit too close for it, and so therefore have just too much of a zoom for my liking. The MCPR 300, I'd recommend the FSS OLV laser, the Nilsound 90, the 300 mag explosive, the Cronin Cheetah grip, and the FSS Merc stock, trying to kit it out for a little bit more mobility while also affording that sniper one-hit potential. And the FJX Imperium, still getting my bearings here on this one, getting the bullet lead and everything down. For this, I'd recommend the FJX Blast Bolt, the 408 explosive, the Fahrenheit 29-inch barrel, the Nilsound 90 muzzle, and the VLK laser 7mW. But that is your Season 3 top 10 loadouts that I would recommend here for Warzone 2.0. Again, if you guys disagree, agree, whatever the case, it's totally cool. These are just my recommendations. If you find something that works a little better for you, that's awesome, and feel free to leave it down there in the comments below. But before we wrap everything up, a reminder, check out my friends over at G Fuel for 20% off your entire order with code Espresso all the time, but 30% off certain items like Starfruit and Hype Sauce tubs for the month of April. Honestly, those are my regular rotation along with the Morbius Nectarine flavor. Actually commentating it now here, I have Hype Sauce in my shaker cup right now that I'm drinking next to me. I'd recommend any of those if you guys are at all interested. So if you'd like to check it out, use code Espresso, get 30% off those certain items. Feel free to. Link in the description below. But that said, that is what we're going to call it. So let me know your thoughts down below. Again, like the builds, dislike the builds, whatever the case, feel free to drop it. But if you enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay updated with all things Modern Warfare 2, Warzone 2, and anything COD related. But for now, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.